awful day yesterday. 2 days ago, I went and got the third vaccine for COVID, and yesterday it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was feeling pretty unwell right away, but man, yesterday I was just nauseous and fever and couldn't eat anything, and it was awful. But woke up feeling much better, so broke the streak of 60 days in a row streaming because I just couldn't do it. I was looking green. It was not fun. So yeah. So let's get into this. Facing preflop raise and a call. So this will be about four betting at 35 to 60 big blinds. And this is it seems a little specific, but this comes up a lot more than you think. So let me make sure that the sound's on. All right.
Now let's discuss when you're facing a pre-flop raiser and then a caller before the action gets to you. Remember, the calling player will usually be capped, meaning they often do not have their best hand. So the main person you're concerned with is the initial raiser. If the initial raiser, the RFI, the raise first in, is a tight aggressive player, a tag, you just want to play fundamentally sound poker. Generally, you're just going to want to follow the 40 big blind charts. I would tell you to be a little bit tighter in general, be a little bit more inclined to call with these suited connected hands, but you're just not going to want to do anything too out of line in this scenario because your opponent's going to have a decently strong range. Now, when I say don't do anything out of line, I don't mean never bluff. You should still bluff with a very strong polarized range from in position and then a bit more linear range from out of position. But you don't want to just sit there and be very, very tight because if you only 3-bet with the nut hands, they're going to realize that and then play accordingly. Against a tight player, a nit, if the initial raiser is tight, you're going to want to fold the big cards that are often dominated, like king-jack offsuit. If someone raises and someone calls and you have king-jack offsuit against a tight raiser, fold. You do not need to play this hand. You do not need to bluff this hand. You just don't even need to put a chip in the pot because you are going to be heavily dominated. You want to be calling with the implied odds hands, like 10-9 suited, maybe even hands like 6-5 suited. 5-4 suited and lower are not particularly great hands to call with because they really flop pretty bad hands. They flop bad straights and bad flushes, but 7-6 suited or 6-5 suited and better are usually good enough to call. The pocket pairs are great to call, and I would actually be less inclined to 3-bet with even a hand like jacks or queens against a tight player. Like imagine a tight player raises under the gun and then another early position player calls and you have pocket queens and the low jack seat. It is perfectly fine to just flat call in that scenario, especially if you expect to get 4-bet by the initial raiser very often because their opening range may only be aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace-king. You'd much rather just call, see the flop, and go from there, especially with jacks, 10s, 9s, etc. And with hands that may normally be used as good, strong blocker bluffs, like ace-jack offsuit, king-queen offsuit, etc., you should not be 3-betting them as often. You should probably call with them, maybe even fold, depending on how tight you think the initial raiser is. Against looser ranges, if the initial raiser is a lag, you are going to want to fold less often. You just want to expand your entire range across the board. Like say, hijack raises, who's a lag, cutoff calls, you're on the button with queen 8 suited. It's fine to call and see the flop. It may seem a little bit loose, but if you're facing a 2 or 2.25 or even 2.5 big blind raise, you can flat call here as long as you don't expect the players yet to act to 3-bet you too frequently. You're typically going to want to call more often with the big cards that are just typically ahead. So hands like king-jack offsuit, it actually dominates a lot of the initial raiser's range. If they're raising king-7 offsuit, and they're going to fold it if you 3-bet them, well, you'd rather just call with king-jack offsuit and keep them in the pot. So calling with some of the big cards becomes more reasonable, and you're going to find you want to be 3-betting even more often with a polarized range. I have ace-10 offsuit listed here. This is a hand that is fine to 3-bet. It's right on the cusp between 3-betting as a bluff or calling, depending on how loose and aggressive your opponent is. If your ace is worse, like ace-8 offsuit or ace-9 offsuit, I would definitely 3-bet or fold that. Usually 3-bet it, though, because that's going to put your opponents in tough scenarios if they're raising with too many hands. If you do have a hand like king-9 offsuit, you probably want to be 3-betting that as well. King-10 offsuit's another hand that's right on the cusp between calling or 3-betting as a bluff, and I would probably 3-bet bluff king-9 offsuit as well. Queen-jack offsuit can probably call, though. So that's usually what I'm doing against the looser aggressive players. And against the calling stations, depending on their range, depending on their strategy, you're going to want to fold less often in general because these are the type of players who are just going to blindly pay you off with a hand like pocket nines if the board comes queen 7-3 and you have queen 8 suited. They're just going to call a flop bet, call a turn bet, call a river bet with a random underpair. I don't know if I just said he had 2 pair or not, but if you have top pair bad kicker, you can value bet three streets against a calling station because they're just going to check call now with all sorts of garbage. So if they're going to pay you off poorly.
That's a scenario, too, I see a lot in the lower level tournaments. I mean, obviously, I'm only playing that level, but like until you get to like $100 buy-ins and bigger, you will see players who just, especially with calling stations don't want to get bluffed like ever. So like that's like the worst thing in the world for them. So you'd be amazed how many times you call a hand like the queen 8 or something like that in position and the player checks and you have a queen, so you just go ahead and bet it. They call and the turn checks and you bet it and they call, and the river they check, and a lot of people don't get the value on the river when they really should be. And when the board's something like, you know, queen 7 deuce 4 5 and the guy has pocket nines, and you know the board is, you know, and he has pocket nines or something like that, you'd really be amazed how many times these players just cannot give it up, even though they never made an effort to define their hand. You know what I'm saying? Just never really did anything to figure out what was going on. Like if they c-bet and you called it, well then obviously you must have a queen or something, or you have some reason to be there. Then they can check the flop and you bet the turn. But when somebody just check call, you don't want to miss that third street of value. You really don't. I don't know what's going on with the stream here. Why is it flipping out on me? So yeah, don't miss the third street of value. Stop yawning. Yeah, well, I'm tired, man. I mean, honestly, I'm like not even fully focused. I'm only at like 80 or 90% today after yesterday. Definitely still fatigued from the shot in a big way, but I feel okay. I really do. I don't know why, but my playback of the stream keeps buffering. Let me know if the stream's giving you guys any trouble. Looks like I'm dropping frames for some reason. Hang on. Let me do this. Maybe that'll help. Yeah, I think that helped. Wow, what is going on with the keyframe here? A lot of people streaming today, I guess. Wow. Weird. Oh well. Okay, so it's working now, I think. Let's keep going.
And they're not going to raise you all that often. That lets you play more hands in general. Now, if under the gun raises and you're in second position with queen 8 suited, you should clearly not play because you have to worry about everyone else at the table yet to act. But as you get into later and later positions, or big blind or even the small blind, you can start to widen your calling range with hands that flop well. You shouldn't really widen your range to call with hands like queen 8 offsuit. That's just not a good hand and you want to fold it. But the suited big card hands are usually decent enough. With the big unsuited cards that are often ahead, against the calling station, you're going to want to be 3-betting. So compare this to a loose aggressive player where I said you should be calling with these hands more often because you're just dominating their range that you want to keep in the pot. Against the calling station, if you 3-bet king jack offsuit, they're still going to call you with a king 7 offsuit. Maybe not quite that wide, but they'll call a jack 10 offsuit. They'll call a jack 9 suited basically every time. And against these players, you can just 3-bet with a strong linear range straight up for value, right? Like I have here, 3-bet for value more often with a linear range. The big, good, strong, big card hands are very, very nice to 3-bet because when you're against a calling station, they're going to call you with all sorts of hands that you dominate. Some players will literally never fold an ace before the flop. If they raise with ace 3 offsuit and you 3-bet them, they're calling because they want to try to make top pair. And clearly, if they have a whole lot of ace 3 offsuits in their range, you can just 3-bet even ace 9 offsuit just straight up for value, realizing that if they do 4-bet you, you fold. And that's okay, because remember, calling stations are generally passive when it comes to putting a lot of money into the pot. So if you know your opponent's going to be passive and they then take a very aggressive line, you should get out of the way. Always remember to reference this concept, this chart. Typically against a nit, a tight player, you're going to want to call more often with implied odds hands and 3-bet bluff way less often. Against a calling station, just 3-bet more often for value. Against a loose aggressive player, again, your strategy is going to change based on the loose aggressive player's tendencies. if a loose aggressive player is just going to 4-bet jam you every time, obviously don't bluff more often, right? You just want to 3-bet with a strong linear range and then call off against the jam. But I think you're going to find most loose aggressive players raise kind of wide, and then if you 3-bet them, they're going to presume you have a pretty strong range. And if they think you have a strong range and you 3-bet them, they're just going to fold, which allows you to generally bluff more often. This is usually my first adjustment against the loose aggressive players, and then if I see they're just like shoving all in on me frequently, then I'll 3-bet linearly instead. And as always, against this good, tight, aggressive, fundamentally sound players, you're just going to want to follow the charts, not do anything too absurd, and play well. All right, let's discuss from the big blind. Look at this. It thinks X suited is not a word. How is X suited not a word? Come on. Well, whatever. It'll be okay. From the big blind, realize you're getting the idea that you're getting a good price and closing the action are not reasons to defend in a multi-way pot. Because as more people see the flop, you're going to realize your equity poorly. Meaning, if you have a hand like King 6 offsuit and you flop top pair, that's just not good for you, because if someone's betting into multiple opponents and they're happy putting a lot of money in, top pair bad kicker is in terrible shape. Whereas heads up, it's often okay.
One of my biggest adjustments in the last year was giving up the big card, little card hands from the big blind. Hands like King 7, Queen 5, hands like that. Even suited variety. I mean, I guess the suited kings are okay if it's like super multi-way, but you got to realize you're playing for 2 pair or better. And it just means checking, somebody bets the flop with a king, and 90% of the time you're just going to fold when the flop comes King 4-9 and you have King 7 in your hand, with maybe with one of your suit on the board. If your hand was suited, that's fine, you could call, but most of the time you're just going to want to give that up pre-flop, and you're going to be getting 7 or 8 to 1. And purely mathematically, purely by solvers and mathematically, you should be calling that hand because you do have that much equity versus the deck. The problem is that when those situations arise, it's less likely that you're the only guy with the king. So your reverse implied odds go through the fucking roof, and unless you really flop 2 pair, you don't know what's going on. Now, there are some exceptions where if it's early in the tournament, super deep stacked, I'm still in the portion where I'm going to re-enter the tournament, then it's fine, because then you're gambling 2-hit, 2 pair or better. It's like set mining. But later in the tournament, maybe when you're at like 20 big blinds and there's a raise and 3 callers and you have that King 7 suited at about 20 or so big blinds, then yeah, you can call it. But if you're at like 40, you really can't, because you're just going to lose way too often. Now, with 20 big blinds, if you flop top pair, you actually kind of want to just get the money in a lot if you have mostly hope. So, somebody bets and you call it and your head's up, and then maybe they're going to bet the turn, maybe not. But usually when it goes bet check and then the river comes off, and you check to them, they're going to bet and take a second bluff shot at it. Those are good ones to pick off. But other than that, really, the big card, little card hands just get you in so much trouble and just cost you buy-ins. 3 or 4 limpers make that call automatic. Limpers, yes. We're not talking about limpers, though. We're talking about somebody who raised and then 3 or 4 people called it. And I know it seems crazy, Eric, but actually I've seen a lot of this on the training site, and many examples from multiple coaches have said that giving up the big card, little card defense in the big blind is actually so plus EV that it beats the solver. It beats the solver in real world trials versus actual pure math. So it's a hard concept to get, and you see that, like what you said, 3 or 4 limpers makes automatic call. That was how my brain worked too. But you really have to discuss in your head what's raising, and then who's calling that raise, who's then calling that call, who's then calling that call. Where does my hand really rank up? Now, granted, there's quite a few instances where you're going to go ahead and call, and it's perfectly fine. But at certain blind levels, at 40 big blinds, specifically, this blind range, this is probably where I fold that hand the most. Anywhere between 30 to 50, maybe 60 blinds is kind of high. But yeah, between 30 and 50 blinds, I'm probably folding a lot of the big card, little card, hands. just because you kind of need to flop trips with your bottom card, right? Like King 7, you need it to come 7-7 whatever, and then you can kind of get the money in happily. But other than that, you're really only you're giving up that call and taking a long shot. You're basically taking like a 40-1 where you have to flop 2 pair or better. You know what I mean? So yeah, I guess if you look at it that way, then it's a very easy fold. But yeah, it was a concept I had to give up, and it was like giving up a limb. It was like something that was so automatic, but I found I had much better results when I did.
So, post-flop playability becomes highly important as more and more people call and more people see the flop. Big, junky offsuit cards are not good. Even ace-X offsuit, like ace-4 offsuit. If it goes raise, call, 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 and you have ace-4 offsuit in the big blind, facing a 2.5 big blind raise, you should just fold. Facing a min raise, 2 big blinds, it's probably okay to call, but barely. So, realize that post-flop playability is highly important. You definitely want to avoid playing hands that make mostly marginal made hands. So, as I have here, against a raise and a call, hands like King X offsuit, King 7 off, Queen 7 offsuit, Jack 5 offsuit, etc. Just fold all of those. You are going to be in great shape. Some people may think, oh, if I call here, I'm getting 6-1 or 7-1 pot odds. How bad can it be just to play to only make 2 pair? The thing is that a lot of people, when they make 1 pair, they still just don't fold. And also, when you do make 2 pairs, sometimes you're beat. When you have King 6 and it comes King Queen 3, and your opponent's trying to put all their money in. I'm sorry, did I say King Queen 3? King Queen 6. You have someone raises, someone calls, someone calls, someone calls, you call King 6. It comes King Queen 6. If someone's willing to put all their money in this scenario, they probably have Ace King, which you beat, or King Queen, which you're pretty much dead against. Or
exact situation that happened in the last Jedi Mind Trick, the archive. There was one there where I had King Queen, I made the raise, player defended in the blind, it came off King Queen 9, and he check raised me on the flop, the turn came off neutral, and he just put all the money in, and I was just like, oh, this guy has King 9 all day. And I got the money in, and sure enough, he had King 9. It was, I mean, King 9 is obviously not the perfect example of this. You would defend with King 9 a lot, but it was a perfect example of a reversed implied odds that made this player with, I mean, I think he had like 60 blinds, made him go broke deep in the tournament. Like, I ended up getting really stacked, so.
Or pocket queens, which you're pretty much dead against. So you're either dead, or you're ahead, but, you know, not absolutely crushing him. So this is a situation where you probably just want to get out of the way. Hands like Ace X offsuit, King X suited, and Queen X suited should be folded against tight raisers or a very large number of opponents. King X suited, perhaps not as much. Like if it goes min raise, call, 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 and you have King 2 suited in the big blind, it's probably okay to call. But Queen 2 suited, Jack 2 suited, those hands do want to fold because at that point you're going to be running into bigger flushes some portion of the time, and you really, really, really don't want to run.
Well, you're much looser than I am, so a call from me in the small blind actually scared. Well, we're talking about the big blind. That's the first part. In this scenario, we're talking about the big blind defense, so it's less of a price, right? Small blind, I'm rarely calling. Small blind, I pretty much have a 3-bet or fold range when it goes raise, call, call. I'm pretty much looking to 3-bet or fold. Scares people. They know I will check no matter what flops, and when I crush the flop, I get their c-bet and calls. Yeah. Hello, Mike. How you doing? What's going on, guys? Good to see you. We're just having some fun going through this next section. This section specifically, we're talking about when you have between 35 and 60 big blinds, mainly focusing on 40 big blinds, is basically what you should keep in your head. And this is big blind defense is what we're talking about. So small blind things, pretty different. Mike Mercy. I know that name. Why do I know that name? What's up, Mike? I think I've seen you around somewhere. Well, I guess I should put that on the other screen. Let's see. Yeah, I think I know that name from somewhere. Maybe I've seen you around. Good to see you, my man. Good luck today. To you, Qui-Gon, bro. Good run. Gotta run. All right. See you, Eric. Yeah. Definitely playing today. Most likely a lot of tournaments today.
Run into bigger flushes in spots that are easily avoidable. So from the big blind, realize as you're playing against more and more players, you do not have to defend super wide. This is a big, big leak of many, many players, and it costs them tournaments all the time. They view these spots as unavoidable. They're like, oh yeah, flop to flush, what am I going to do? Well, the answer is don't play the 9-2 suited to begin with, and you size set the spot where you have huge reverse implied odds. So be very careful from the big blind. Also, as the raise size is bigger and bigger, remember, you should be tighter. In a lot of small stakes live tournaments, people will raise to 4 big blinds, and then 4 people will call. And then I'll see players in the big blind just call with all sorts of junk, thinking, well, closing the action, I'm in the big blind. But no, that is a very bad decision. As it gets more and more multi-way, you have to be cautious whenever you're going to be out of position, especially with hands that are very, very likely dominated by one of your many opponents.
All right, let's do the quiz. Interesting section. This 35 to 60 big blinds, this is kind of where you live at a good portion of the tournament, probably about a third of the time. So it's worth breaking down all these little spots so minutely. Under the gun +1 raises to 2 1/4 out of 40 big blinds, and the cutoff calls. Everyone folds to you in the big blind with 9-6 suited. I think 9-6 suited is one where you can defend. I do like 3-betting some portion of the time, so let's check it out. I'm going to go to the tools section here and see if I'm correct in that. So let's see here. 40 big blinds, tournament pre-flop charts. We're at 40 big blinds. My position is the big blind actions versus a raise. It doesn't have one for the call. The opponent's position, under the gun 1, yeah. Under the gun 1, 9-6 suited. It says it's a call 100% of the time. I like it for a squeeze sometimes, but a call is fine too. It makes me feel better about not defending light. Yeah, you really do have to. Well, that's what we were talking about in this whole section is when you're in the big blind, giving up the real junk hands will do better for you in the long run. And I was saying that it's something for me. I had, having big card, little card, and it's like raise, call, call. And then you're in the big blind. It's like calling is fine with hands with good implied odds, like the 9-6 suited. So just click that. Yep. Because it makes straights and flushes. And you're going to realize your equity fairly well. The problem is with hands with like King 7 or like Queen, 5 or things like that, where you have big card, little card, making a pair sucks. So really it's just these hands we want to defend with. Under the gun, 40 big blinds. Everyone folds to in the big blind with 9-9. Now that's interesting. Because he's under the gun 1, you could definitely call. I do like 3-betting. See, here's the thing. I'm very aggressive. I like 3-betting. Let's go back and see what it says with 9-9. 3-bet only 23% of the time. Call 77%. So I guess it would depend on the player, but let's go with call. Yeah, not strong enough to 3-bet. Now, if there was 2 callers, I'm 3-betting 100% of the time. Under the gun +1 raises, and like the cutoff calls and the button calls, and I'm in the big blind with 9-9. I'm probably 3-betting. And pretty reasonably, like I'm gonna 3-bet to like 10 big blinds or so, and then if the under the gun player +1 just rejams and it folds back to you, you can pretty much fold unless you need to take the race. But if you're still at 40 big blinds, it's kind of light. But if somebody else calls, then you can absolutely get the fuck out of the way. Cutoff raise is 2 1/4, and the button calls. You're in the small blind with king queen off. Well, right off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you this is the classic squeeze scenario, right? Cutoff raises to 2 1/4, button calls. You're in the small blind with king queen off. That's the perfect hand and position and time to raise. And I think you're going to go a little bit bigger. So let's see. 3 times the last bet is what? 675 plus 2 1/4 for the other guy's call. That's 7, 8, 9. Plus the blinds and antes is about 11.5. So yeah, I guess 3-betting to 11 is good. Yeah. 11 big blinds. Great blockers. Removal. It's a squeeze. It's a standard squeeze. When you're multi-way compared to heads up, you will realize your equity better or worse with offsuit disconnected cards. You'll realize it worse because somebody else is going to have your shit. Somebody else is going to have your king or your jack, and they're going to have you crushed. Yeah, dominated more often. There you go. Cool. So that's a good section done. Let's go on to the next one. I'm curious to see what the next section is about.
Now let's discuss
Ooh.
when someone raises, you call, and then someone yet to act 3-bets. This is referred to as a squeeze. When there's a raise and a call, and someone re-raises, that is a squeeze because, remember, essentially...
I love this scenario because this comes up so often, and we're going to go through the way Jonathan Little talks about it and say that's the standard, but I've realized that there's a lot of scenarios where somebody 3-bets, you call, somebody squeezes, the original raiser folds, and you now realize that your range is stronger than the 3-better. Like that small blind scenario. If somebody raised, and I had jacks in the cutoff, right, and under the gun +1 raised, and it came around to me with jacks in the cutoff, I can go either way between 3-betting or just calling. In the scenarios where I did just call, and then the small blind 3-bets, right, and then it goes back to the under the gun +1, and he folds, it is so amazingly strong to back jam on this player, because especially with a hand like pocket jacks or 10s, because they're going to have a jack or a 10 in their hand quite a lot. They're going to have hands like king jack, ace 10, ace jack, all those kind of hands. And when you back jam, they're going to go, oh, pair. And they're just going to call with king jack, and they're going to be like, oh, shit, 3 outs, not 6. That one is so fucking amazing to me. But that's just a side note of something I like to do. But we'll just go through the section.
The caller, the player in the middle, should be capped, which means they only have to worry about the initial raiser having a strong hand. So,
capped in this scenario meaning not having their strongest hands, right? If somebody raises and you call, obviously you don't have aces, kings, queens, right? You don't have your strongest hands. You don't have ace, king suited. You know what I'm saying? You have hands like suited connectors, small pairs, suited aces, things like that. Those are the hands that you have when you just call that raise, in position.
in general, you want to proceed cautiously, but always ask yourself, what are the ranges at play? Remember, the 3-better is the most important range to consider because usually they are going to have the strongest range. Some players will only 3-bet over raise and a call with the absolute best hands, where some players will do it really, really wide because, they don't care. They're just throw in some money and see what happens. So definitely consider who you are against. So a few factors that will increase your ability to call. When you're facing more players, you usually get to call a little bit wider, assuming your hand is a strong implied odds hand. If it is just a high card hand, like ace jack offsuit, it would much prefer to be heads up. So realize that the big card hands would much prefer to be in a heads up pot. The suited connected hands, small pairs, etc., would much prefer to be in a multi-way pot because that will give them the proper implied odds or close enough to the proper implied odds. If you are closing the action, you usually should be calling more often. What I mean by closing the action is you want to be the last person to act. If you're the last person to act, no one yet to act can surprise you by re-raising. Every once in a while, you'll see a spot where someone raises, someone calls, someone 3-bets, someone calls, and then the player who initially called the raise re-raises. That's referred to as a back raise after you took a passive action by just calling and then you re-raise. That's referred to as a back raise. And that completely wrecks the player who called the 3-bet, right? Because they put in 7 big blinds or something like that, and now they have to fold. So closing the action usually allows you to play slightly wider than when you're not closing the action. If you are the first caller and there's like 4 callers yet to act, you actually should proceed really tightly because you may get back raised by any of those 4 players. It's not going to happen very often, but it will happen sometimes. Whenever you're getting better pot odds, you call more often. When you're getting worse pot odds, you do not. So let's take a look at an example. Here we have a tricky limper. We have a raise to 2.5 big blinds. We have a call. This is a situation where I would call virtually every time with the pocket 5s. If there was no limper, I would still call with the pocket 5s. I'm never folding because I think the tricky limper may re-raise some portion of the time. If that happens,
That's one of those things where this player is a tricky limper, meaning that they're very capable of limping in first position, waiting for the raise, and then 3-betting behind after a bunch of calls. Even if you know that this player does that, you can't fold the 5s because, sure, they have that in their range, but players like this also have limping suited connectors in their range. So they're just going to call the raise, and you're going to get the proper odds with the 5s. So you can't be worried. You can't level yourself into thinking, oh, the dude has the ability to limp aces under the gun, so he should just, I should just fold open this, this small pocket pair. He has it, but it might not be this time. You know what I'm saying? Tricky doesn't always mean they're going for the raise.
Such as life. If I could tell, if I tell, yeah, I can't even talk. If I could tell very clearly the tricky limper planned on limp re-raising here, then I would fold. But
yeah, I've had that scenario happen in a live game. It was funny. I actually had pocket sevens on the button, and it was like an old man coffee, kind of guy who raised everything he came in with, and I was sitting there for like 2 hours, and I had beaten him a bunch of times when everybody folded, and I just got to call with like a suited connector or something, made 2 pair, and he just saw me as the luckiest guy in the world, but he just never folded. So then this one hand, he limps in first, and I see a call and a call, and it's funny because I was looking away from the table. I remember very specifically, I was looking at the tournament announcement board, and I was thinking, ooh, I want to get in that, and then somebody went, hey, it's your action, and I went, oh, shit, what happened? And I went, okay, you called, who raised? And he went, I raised. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, this motherfucker's in first. And I went, all right, I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to fold. And I did it in that moment because I was like, this motherfucker, he's finally got like aces or kings or something. And sure enough, it got back to him. And I remember very distinctly, I was looking at the tournament board again, and I was like thinking in my head, I'm like, I can't wait to see how much this motherfucker raises. Because he had limped it for $2. There was a raise to 10 and a call. I folded. It went back to him, and he made it 80. 80. Out of first position after a limp. Like, if you'd made it 30, I would have had some respect for him. But he was just so scared to get his aces cracked. And sure enough, the other guys folded, and he goes, yeah, well, and he shows the aces. And he was just like, I didn't want to, whatever. He's like, I'll take that. That's fine. Is it, though? You just won $23. Good for you. It's so dumb. But it was hilarious. But that's a very rare situation. But usually only a live
very
tell.
rarely will you be able to really clearly tell that's going to happen. So I call. Now the player on the button makes it 500. It goes call, 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 call. Well, take a second. Let's consider our implied odds. Super
easy call here. With the implied odds, you need 10 to 1, right? So you're calling 1,500 to win 2, 4, 6, 8, 10,000, 10,600. So you're calling 1,500 to win 10,600, right? That's almost 8 to 1 right there, right? 10,600, 1,500, 6 to 1, 7 to 1, something like that. 7 to 1, yeah, 7 to 1. So you don't need much more to go into this pot. You only need another 4,500 to go in, and if you flop a 5 in this scenario, 4,500 more is going into the pot. Don't worry. So, yeah, it's literally a half pot bet on the flop. So this is a call all day.
We have to put in 1,500 into a 12,000 pot. That gives us, 6 to 1 implied odds? Yeah, 6 to 1 implied odds immediately. Then we can win another 8,500, which gives us another 6 to 1. So 6 plus 6 is 12. So at this point, we are getting the right implied odds to call. Even though, notice here, we're actually calling off a pretty big chunk of our stack. The fact that all of these other players called is now allowing me to call with a much wider range. If this was a heads-up pot, we would be subtracting 1, 2, 3, 4 of those 12 to 1 pot odds, which would give us 8 to 1 pot odds, so we would not be able to call. So realize, in this scenario, better pot odds allow us to call wider. If I was in the hijack seat instead of the cutoff seat, and let's say the cutoff was still here, I would still call the pocket 5s because the odds you get back raised by the the third caller or whatever this is. The odds that you get back raised by that player is very, very unlikely. If I was in this scenario as the tricky limper with pocket 5s, I would definitely fold.
Mm-hmm.
Let's consider why. In this scenario, let's say I did limp a pocket 5s and for some reason, or let's just say I was in the big blind and the under the gun player raised, whatever. In this scenario, the main person the player on the button who squeezes, who re-raises, has to worry about is the under the gun +1 player, right? Because this player is very uncapped. This is the one player at the table who, once they raise and all this action happens, could still have aces, kings, queens, ace, king, etc. So this under the gun player has to be very cautious in this scenario because they are going to get jammed on by under the gun +1 some portion of the time. So this is a spot where the big blind should be very tight because they have to worry about the tricky limper too. Under the gun should be very tight, and that's because under the gun +1 is going to have the nuts some portion of the time. But in this scenario, closing the action, getting good implied odds, we will call. If I had a good suited connected hand, what I'd call. If I had Jack 10 suited, I would call. If I had 10-9 suited, it'd start to get close. 8-7, 7-6, etc. I would just fold. We are going to realize our full implied odds most of the time in this pot, because notice if we do call, the pot's 12,000 and we have 7,000 left, right? But the problem is our hand is just not going to flop good enough, and we're going to be dominated by bigger flush draws some portion of the time. So you should be very cautious in this scenario with the weaker suited connected hands. If I had a hand like ace 5 suited, I would definitely fold. If I had ace 10 suited, I'd probably call, but I think that's even pretty dicey. If I had a hand like ace jack offsuit, king, queen offsuit, etc., I would definitely fold here. If I had ace queen offsuit, might shove it all in.
Yeah,
As a bluff, right? So here is an example of a spot where if I did randomly have ace queen offsuit here, I may back raise it all in. Let's think about that. If I jam ace queen offsuit and one player calls me, I will be putting in 9,000 chips total into a pot that's going to be 18,000 plus another 9. So the pot will be 27,000 chips total, and I will have put in 9,000 of them. So at that point, I need to win 33% of the time. And ace queen actually does.
By the math, even if the 3-better has kings, you're supposed to jam here because you're going to beat him 30% of the time. Oh, that's so brilliant. That's an interesting raise bluff kind of scenario.
Does okay, even against a relatively
I just weighed myself.
strong range. And if you think this player here on the button is playing too wide, you're going to have a lot of fold equity against the player on the button. So now you're really only worried about the tricky limper, which probably would have re-raised aces anyway. So we're not really worried about the tricky limper. Or the under the gun +1 player, who we're not really worried about as well, because he probably would have re-raised with aces, kings, queens, and ace king. So if we know the player on the button is very loose and aggressive, and we know the tricky limper doesn't have the nuts, and we know under the gun +1 doesn't have the nuts, hands like ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, they become pretty sweet to jam with, because you are going to get called by hands like jacks, 10s, 9s, etc. But you're flipping against those. So if we're 50-50 against most of our opponent's range, and we're only putting in a third of the money into the pot, that is a good risk-reward ratio. You may say, but don't you risk losing the tournament? Yes, you do. That is okay. Sometimes spots like this are very, very prime to realize I'm taking a substantial amount of risk. I could go broke, but we're getting such an overlay. There's so much more money in the pot than is required to allow us to make a profit that we can easily jam in this scenario. I would also be concerned about the big blind here. Funny enough, you have to worry about all three of these limpers in this weird scenario. But in a normal scenario where someone raises from early position, someone calls, you call, this guy squeezes, the big blind folds, this guy calls, this guy calls, this guy calls. That's a spot where if I did have a reasonably strong hand that's flipping against hands like jacks, 10s, 9s, ace, queen, etc., I think shoving is pretty sweet. That's a pocket 5s in this scenario. I'm just always going to call and go to the flop. And that's usually what you want to be asking yourself in these scenarios. I know we extrapolated this one scenario a ton, but that's how poker works. Usually you can look at one scenario and discuss many, many, many potential scenarios from it. A lot of people really want to get it in their head. What do I do in this one particular spot? But really you want to ask yourself, what do I do in all the spots with this hand and all the other hands? And if you constantly think about how you play not just your one specific hand, but your entire range in all scenarios, remember, always think about ranges. That's going to allow you to learn poker and develop your poker skills way faster. But in this scenario, am I getting the right implied odds? The answer is yes. So we have a very, very easy call, and we go to the flop, and if we get a set, we're all in. If we don't get a set, well, we fold.
It's one of those things, too, where you start thinking about extrapolating those scenarios, and what he just described right at the end there, where this player raised, call, this player 4-bets, fold, that was the exact scenario that I was talking about at the start of this, where backjamming now becomes super profitable with pairs of 10s plus, because this squeeze can be so many ranges of cards, and there's so much money in the pot that taking a race here, even if the guy has ace-king, taking the race is just super profitable. And the back jam with ace-queen, when we see the call here, call for 2K. Now jamming in a situation where you only have to win 30% of the time, but you're getting, this a massive pot that you can play for. It's just fucking brilliant. So I really like that 3-bet or that 4-bet jam bluff. Pretty strong move. As stacks get shorter, your implied odds increase. False. You need more chips to play for implied odds. High unpaired cards go down in value as more players enter the pot. Well, that's true. Yeah. More likely to be dominated. All right. Three better should have a premium range. You should go all in with your best hands. If the three better should have a premium range, you should go all in with your best hands. I mean, this is kind of obvious. I mean, I feel like I'm overthinking it, but if the three better has a premium range, you should go all in with your best hands. I would say true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're less incentivized to slow play because it's kind of like if you flop a set, right? Like somebody raises, you have pocket sevens, and the flop comes king or ace 7-4, and the player bets 2/3 pot. You can kind of get the money in right there because they've told you they have a hand that they like. You know what I'm saying? So when you jam, especially on like a flush card board, like let's say it's ace of hearts, seven of hearts, deuce of clubs, and you have pocket sevens, and the guy has ace king offsuit, you're going to get the money in there a lot because he's going to just think you're raising with a flush draw. People don't see sets. So when somebody gives you a clear signal that they like the situation, but you know you have it nutted, just get all the money in. If you slow play, he might go, why is this guy calling me? You know what I'm saying? Also, they might sit there and, a heart hits and now it kills your action and you can't get any more money because his exact fear has been realized. Somebody called him with a flush draw and got there. He doesn't know that you don't have the flush, but it just saved him. So interesting, when you see those bets, you should definitely just try to get the money in. It's like having aces. If somebody raises and you decide, or if you raise and somebody three bets, and somebody calls it, and you four bet, and the initial three bet or five bets, you should just jam all the money in. Like there's really no whatever. Or if you raise and they three bet, or what was I saying? Or if they raise and you three bet with aces, goes back to them, they four bet, just five bet jam it because they've told you that they like their hand. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's kind of convoluted, but definitely a good point to make. All right, it's only been about 40 minutes, but today's going to be a play day, and it's going to be a long play day. I'm going to probably come back about 2 o'clock, which is in about an hour and a half. I feel like there's a lot of good tournaments today, and I want to be playing. I'm going to start playing some more cash on stream, just because why not? So I'll see you guys later. I'm not going to host anybody. You got it, Zaki? Yeah. I'm glad I made that point. I was trying to articulate it. I appreciate that. I got a follow there. I didn't see who it came from. See me later. Thanks. That was probably Zuki who followed, or Zuxi. Let me see what it was. Let's come up on Streamlabs. I want to thank that follower. I didn't see the notification. Do. Oh, why is this taking so long? Yeah. Signed in. Got it. Recent events. Where is it? Yep, Zuki. Good to see you. Much appreciated. I will see you guys later. What's up, Chuck? I'll see you guys later in about an hour and a half or so. We're going to play a lot of poker today. Saturday and Sundays are my big days. I'll have the house to myself tonight and tomorrow. So it's all about the pokers, man. I'll see you guys later. Don't forget to check out the YouTube for new stuff. The latest Jedi mind trick is fucking bananas. I really think you'll like it, and I worked super hard on the opening. Please check it out. Let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys in a little bit. Have a great day, y'all. I'll see you in about 90 minutes.